for me. My lover stands on golden sand and watches the ships that go sailing somewhere.
Hello, and welcome back to Dev Game Club, a weekly podcast in which two veteran game developers look at games from the past to discuss their relevance and impact today. I'm Brett Duville, and I'm joined as always by my co-host, a man whose parents told him he was special, that he was born to do great things.
Tim Longo. I was waiting for the last part of that line because I just played it, so I remembered it, and I was like, he's stopping right there.
What was the next thing?
He says, "And I did."
Oh, and I did, right? Yeah, I was not going to say that. Your time isn't up yet, sir. I can't.
Fair enough.
I'd say it's in the balance right now. It could go either way. Your choices will determine which way it goes from here on out, I would say.
Yeah, of course. Except if my plane crashes in the middle of the ocean, conveniently next to a sunken city, then maybe it's not convenient. I guess
that kind of
find out.
Gives away the game a little bit, as it were. We, of course, are talking about, I listed the other games released this year, and I put Bioshock in the darn list. We are talking about 2007's Bioshock. This is a second game that we're playing from Irrational, although at the time it was not known as Irrational Games. Do you remember what it was called at the time? Oh, it probably came up in the opening, cinematic or whatever.
2K Boston?
Yeah, it was called 2K Boston. And after this game's success, they were like, oh, you know what? You know what we should call this? We should call this Irrational Games, because I'm sure somebody in the marketing department went and said, you know what helps sell games to a certain audience is, the idea that this is an immersive sim lineage game. Therefore, So.
Yeah, I remember when they branded 2K Boston, and it was a little sad.
It was. Oh yeah.
I was like, why? What I
feel like Firaxis, they tried that too, and Firaxis kind of pushed back when they acquired them, and maybe that's how this all came about. This is not. It doesn't really matter, but these are the sorts of things that we notice when we're keeping track of the game industry news, and how identity is lost, and like how
publishers go on purchasing sprees, and it's sort of the big and one that hits close to home in weird ways for both of us is Microsoft and what they're going through right now, and the big question, right, of like how much all these studios they're buying up how much of their own identity are going to be retained, and Bethesda as one seemingly so far outwardly keeping their identity. So
sure,
there's June already.
There's June. June has opinions, and I think June would say it's only until they fail, and that's when their identity has to change. And I don't know that 2K Games Boston had really failed, although their prior title to this was SWAT 4, which I don't think
didn't set the world on fire.
Oh my God! Exactly the phrase I was going to use. Well done, sir.
It didn't. Although it's a bit of a cult squad shooter, but cult classic.
Oh, for sure. And one we looked at, and played, and thought about when we were making Republic.
But ironically, I think
came out the year before.
Yeah, I think ironically, the part, like you said earlier, part of the rebranding back to Irrational was because of Bioshock's success.
Absolutely.
Sort of like, so it kind of worked in reverse in that case, where they preemptively tried to rebrand all their studios 2K and then realized it was a bad idea. Because you want, when somebody says a Firaxis game, people know
really what that means. When somebody says fans, a 2K game, people go, is it sports? Like, people don't know what a 2K game is other than the 2K sports label. So anyway, there's a bunch of stuff that we didn't talking about. So we're already on track. This, of course, came out in 2007, so we are expanding the Dev Game Clubiverse to include 2007, which is a year that didn't exist prior to this, but also a year in which a number of games came out. So, and now I'm sort of like, now these are all on the table. And here are some: Portal, Halo 3. Let me see if I can pick out the shooters. Call of Duty 4, Modern Warfare. Let's see.
Stalker.
Metroid Prime 3. Can't really call it a shooter. Crisis, Stalker Shadow of Chernobyl were some big ones that I pulled out of that list. It's also the year of the Wii with Super Mario Galaxy. And I think you said Wii Sports, of course. Metroid Prime 3 I already mentioned. A lot of stuff going on. Of course, a Ratchet and Clank game, the first in the Future series, which were the PS3 series, Tools of Destruction.
Did you mention Orange Box already?
I did not mention the Orange Box other than Portal. So, yeah.
Portal. I mean, Orange Box was such a weird product because it was Half-Life 2, Episode 2, so the last Half-Life game since Alex, right?
Yeah, prior to Alex, yep.
And then Team Fortress 2.
Team Fortress 2, yeah.
Which is still going, and doing fairly well still, which is also just one of those weird things. And then Portal, multi-award winning and a bit of a sleeper hit, right? People didn't really know. And then, go look. I'm sure we'll play Portal someday because there's a lot of interesting history about that game. As a completely non sequitur, not completely, but I'm looking at the list and... weirdly, there's something called Medal of Honor Vanguard, and I looked at it and I was like, "Wait, that's coming out. That's coming out this year." No, Call of Duty Vanguard is coming out this year, the new one.
Wow!
So, which Medal of Honor was
they're running out of words.
Well, and Call of Duty came out of Medal of Honor, so it's just so funny. Anyway.
Oh, wow.
Vanguard. Anyway, so a lot of, but a pretty busy year, pretty good year for sure. You mentioned Mass Effect, I think, right?
I did, yeah. No, actually I didn't. There were a few Xbox games I didn't mention yet. Assassin's Creed, Mass Effect, and then on the PS3, Uncharted. Also The Witcher, Peggle, Puzzle Quest, Crackdown, the Burning Crusade expansion for World of Warcraft, which was the first one. Is that correct?
Yeah,
first expansion for a while.
First expansion, yeah. Mm-hmm. So it
was
definitely a big deal.
Yeah, and then Tomb Raider, and actually, I don't think I've ever played any of that content. And then Tomb Raider Anniversary, which is the Wii version. Every time I bring up this game, he says the Wii version. My co-host worked on a bit. At least on the Wii version is what I'm hearing.
Well, the PS2 version did come out this year. I think that's probably the version they came out. I don't think they came out in the same year, but maybe not. Maybe they did.
Oh yeah, I actually didn't check that. Yeah,
the PS2 version, very good game. Jason Bada and Lulu, who we had on the podcast. She was the producer on the original Anniversary Tomb Raider Anniversary remake. So
it did in fact come out on Windows, PS2, 360, PSP, and Wii in 2007, and then later came out on OS X in 2008.
Must have been the tail end then.
Yeah, so either end of the year, I guess. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Cool.
But what was I going to say? You mentioned Mario Galaxy, Modern Warfare, original, which has already been rebooted. Oh, and then the funny thing about Burning Crusade is that WoW Classic just came out with the Burning Crusade.
Oh, so they are advancing.
Yeah, and we shouldn't go down the rabbit hole, but it's kind of a bummer. I don't know how they're going to handle it, but it's kind of starting to defeat the purpose for me already. But let's see. Yeah,
I get it. You would think. I mean, not going down the rabbit hole. Oh my god, I'm already like, and then I start thinking about it. Oh my god, yeah. No,
Rainbow Six Vegas. Rainbow Six Vegas looks like.
Oh, wow, okay.
That's a good one.
That's a good one. We played that.
That's maybe the Rainbow Six. As far as Rainbow Six games go, I think Vegas may be my favorite of all of them.
Is it the Rainbow Sixiest?
Yes, of course. Yes, better. That's well put. Yeah, so it's a lot of good stuff this year. A lot of.
Yeah, we played that one all the way through co-op. Actually,
I mean, Halo
Rainbow Six
3.
Vegas.
Yeah, we did. Yeah.
Yeah, Halo 3. Sure, yeah.
Another big one. So, which is weirdly, we still haven't played Halo 1 now that I think about it. Which, yeah, maybe time has healed enough wounds where that's going to be okay. But
Halo 1 and Halo 3 are the two Halos I've played. So
we could play Halo 1 for the podcast remotely co-op because it's on Steam now. So
wow,
this food for thought. That'd be hilarious on Legendary. Let's do it.
Oh, on Legendary. Oh, okay.
No.
Well, I hope your skills are there because I'll be the one who's teleporting back in. Let's turn to our various topics. Of course, this is an entry in what we called the Shock verse, which is not really a thing, but it does have shock in the title. And of course, that ties into our own Shock verse here on the podcast, where System Shock 2 is the first game we played. And this is another game directed by Ken Levine, who we had on for an interview. Sorry for the sound quality if anybody's going back to it. And we should talk a little bit about that legacy and how much that really informs this game. I do feel like, and I remember this at the time, there was a lot of excitement that there was a new Irrational game, even if it wasn't called Irrational. But it did not have it did not and does not have the same immersive sim depth, which is something I think we'll return to. But it does kind of it is sort of sim light, like we'll say, or RPG elements. We'll say it has immersive sim elements. It just doesn't really dive into it fully. This is sort of like, well, if you were going to have a first immersive sim, your first sort of touch at an immersive sim, this might be a good place to start from that standpoint. There are some interactions. They're not complex. They're not surprising, really. It's pretty rare that something really strange happens from them. Like I said, we'll talk about that more as time goes on. But anyway, I mean, what do you take away from it with shock in the title?
Yeah, I mean, I think that was, I mean, in our circles and in the game development circle, and critics probably as well, that was sort of the big debate about this game. Not the big, but one of the debates about this game. And that was not the switcheroo, but I think by the time, not to jump to the last episode, but by the time I had finished the game originally, and I think I've actually only played it the one time, so I didn't play it multiple times after that, even though I did like the game. There was a bit of, to be honest, disappointment because Shock is in the name and because we all wanted System Shock 3, and this was like, oh, this is not System Shock 3, it's a new thing, and it's like got a new aesthetic, and it's got a new story, and it's very original, and things we'll start talking about in a moment. But wait a second, where's the stuff that I was looking for in the immersive sim direction? And so I mean, you even start with the wrench, right? I mean, it's very much leaning into its history, from and you get a power very quickly too, right? Yeah. So it's like early on in the session that we're about to talk about, like you get your hope is high so far because you not to jump ahead, but you electrocute some water with your power, electrical power, you're upgrading your body, and there's he's clearly powers and stuff, but it's like I think the debate came down to, is it a Shock game? And it's it's called a spiritual successor to System Shock series, and was that really, did they capitalize off of that? Because really, and I think that obviously the series has gone on and is still going. They started a new studio, so they did just System Shock 2, which was not done by Irrational. Then they did
Bioshock 2.
Oh, sorry, yeah. Bioshock 2. They Bioshock Infinite. 2 came in, yep. And then and now they started up a new studio, Cloud Chamber, that is supposed to be doing even more Bioshock. So it's doing fine, But what ended up happening, I think, with this game is it set a trajectory of, I guess what I'll say is broadening the audience for an immersive sim. So because it ended up being an immersive sim light, I think it was probably strategically a good idea to do that. But for the nerds like me, it's sort of like, well, I really actually like the game Prey, the reboot Prey, because it's like, that is what I'm talking about. Like, that's the stuff. And this is more like, okay, yeah, they're making a good business decision, not to be super snarky about it, but they're making a good decision on selling more copies and making it broader so more people can enjoy it. But you really, the depth isn't there. So, but we'll talk about it more as we go.
I mean, the other thing I would say about that, and this is more on the positive side, is I do think that one of the things that they did as a company is that they got better at the shooter part, right? I mean, certainly you look at System Shock 2, or other games that they made, they're kind of, as shooters, they're rough, and
they got criticized for it.
And they did get criticized for it, and it's definitely, I think the thing that they did here is that they said, you know what, let's get a lot better at that stuff. And when you're doing that, you to really focus on one thing, of course, you got to, focus less on other things. And that's just, time and money, right? I mean, so I think that's, and, you add into that immersive sims are famously pretty difficult to build because of things like balancing are just really hard. Because and bugs can be very strange and hard to track down or reproduce because the conditions are very specific. They're just hard to make, right? That's a high degree of difficulty on making a good immersive sim, which is why we should be so thankful that we continue to get them from Arcane. Yeah, and speaking of which, Deathloop comes out tomorrow. I think it'll have come out yesterday. I think it's Tuesdays, right, or the release day. So it will have come out yesterday when you're hearing this, or when you're able to hear this for the first time. So it's a good time, I guess, to be talking about the lineage of all these sorts of things. Anyway.
Yeah, and as we go through the series, we'll definitely talk more and more about this topic we're hitting now. I think it's good to just set it, tee it up, throw it out there, and then we'll come back to it time, because obviously any depth that is going to come over time of playing as you're gaining more stuff, and where that depth starts flattening out. But yeah, they did focus on making a more of a modern shooter. I think it's funny that, to me, I guess now that I'm thinking about it, the fact that both Half-Life 2, the final Half-Life 2, well, really the Orange Box in general, and Halo 3 are in the same year, because, being somebody who's fairly critical of shooters, they made progress, but I think I'm already remembering as I'm playing this first session that they still had a ways to go, but on the shooter part. But they definitely, if you take System Shock 2 as an example, you're like, that wasn't the focus, but this is clearly a shooter with light immersive sim and RPG elements, but it is a shooter first. You're right. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and I think that the big change really is to find this sort of palatable way of bringing in magic, whatever, left hand, right hand, with the plasmids, and finding a way that makes sense in their shooter, and to treat those things often like shooter weapons, even if they often affect the environment more than they affect creatures directly, although I guess they can do both. Anyway, let's talk about the opening sequences. Of course, I already referenced them, in that the special one, the chosen one, is on an airplane, which was a shock at the time, to say something I shouldn't have said. A shock. It's a weird intro to this game. Because, we had all seen some press and we sort of knew about Big Daddies probably, and this city under the sea. And I think the marketing machine of this game was quite good. And it had won a lot of awards at, an E3 or something like that prior to it. And in fact, it's what made Bioshock Infinite's reveal movie
be such a big deal as well when that came out some years later. It was kind of like, oh man, what have they been up to? The people who brought us the original. Anyway, you're in this plane, which is a strange way to start. Another game this year, Assassin's Creed, I don't remember if it started this way, but it also had a kind of a shocking start compared to what you knew about the game. I think it was the opening. Now I'm like, oh, was it?
Talking about like
I'm talking about the framing
Animus?
story. Yeah, the Animus stuff. I
Yeah,
can't remember if the game
they
actually
tried.
starts with the Animus. I feel like the game actually, the end of the first chapter basically goes to Animus, and you're like, what? But it's a similar sort of thing of like, oh, this is a different thing than I understood. And keeping those secrets in 2007, was a hard thing to do. So kudos to both for doing so. And you splash down into the ocean. It's a very controlled sequence, but you have the moment where you're watching the plane drop away from you. It's basically the Incredibles moment when Elastigirl drops into the ocean with the kids, where you can literally see the piece of this plane going down past you, and you're struggling up to the surface, and you're like, uh-oh, I wasn't expecting this. And luckily, yes, as you said, there's a beacon there. It just happens. You've crashed down right next to this stone obelisk that is jutting out of the ocean, which, I don't know, kind of an expensive way, I would say, to bring people to the city of Rapture. If you have to bring down a plane every time you do it, I guess before that, maybe boats. And that's where you're kind of like, oh, okay. And I will say the reveal of Rapture remains a pretty high on my list for gaming moments of just like, oh, whoa, yeah. How was that for you back in the day?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, we've talked about it with Half-Life when we played that for the podcast, but it's that theme park kind of feeling, opening, and it's one of the better, more memorable ones because it's so unique and different. And it, as we talk about System Shock, and kind of the legacy there, you don't know what to expect because it's so fresh, and going very like pacing wise, going through each moment in a way that lets it breathe, which is nice too, because it's a pretty slow, methodical sort of opening. It's still is very, I'm playing the remastered version, which probably you are too. Sorry, June is, man. Yeah. So, I mean, the bathysphere and, the word that I wrote down that I was happy to write down and forgot, because you mentioned that, you mentioned sort of the plane and that kind of being a cool reveal and unexpected, and you're not really, and then you see this tower jutting from the ocean, and then you start kind of like grokking the concept that this is in the middle of the ocean, and you're like, what is happening? And then when the bathysphere goes down, the elevator first, then bathysphere. Anyway, I forget, bathysphere is the elevator. And then you see 10 fathoms, 18 fathoms, you're just going down,
right.
down, and the water sort of theme, the ocean theme starts, no pun intended, leaking into sort of the feel of the game. And then there's just this great mystery that is starting to sort of be delivered, because you're like, it seems to be inviting you to come here, but this is a plane crash. And then you're like, you don't even really know who you are yet. And then, but things seem bad here. You're not sure what's going on. And there's immediately horror being presented to you too. But seeing that fly through of the city under the water, is very original, very like, just fresh, and very cool. So yeah, I agree. Very memorable still.
And with the sea life, right? I mean, you've like a squid or something that flies past, and schools of fish. There's even a whale, I guess, at one point. And you're going through all of this, and ultimately brought through several rings and into like a docking bay or whatever, sort of like a as I remember from 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, like never really understanding how does this work? Like, how is it that they can come out of the water? They have a hole in their boat, like, you know, anyway. Yeah, so it's an interesting introduction. And I think about the effort that goes into that. And it's like, yeah, I mean, this is the thing is, though, is that these moments matter. And one of the things Todd always talked about, Todd Howard, about Fallout 3 was the moment you step out of the vault is a moment that you you really want to pay off on. You're right. This is a really impressive moment. You know exactly where the camera's going to be, et cetera, et cetera. So you can really do a lot for your world in that moment. Like, what are you going to show? You know, what is it going to feel like? You can build sound cues and things like that to it. And this is basically an extended version of that moment. They get to have the moment extend through, you know, a minute or whatever of animation. And they build all that stuff that you're really not going to see again, right? I mean, this is the only time you're out there in the bathysphere and seeing the transition.
But it's critical, right? I mean, I totally agree. Yeah. I mean, it's critical for you to, because now you're just going to be sort of in the first person shooterness of it all, right? Where they're just smoke and mirrorsing. But without that establishing shot, you wouldn't really even understand like how you were in buildings, you know, and how there are different locations, and you know, I think that Rapture is still, you know, today, like Black Mesa or whatever, it's still today the concept of a single location that is this backdrop for, you know, it's a character. The cheesy thing we always say is that, you know, the world is a character, and this is a character in and of itself. Like when you say Rapture to a gamer, you know, that one word means so much, you know, because, you know, most hardcore gamers know of Bioshock or played it or whatever. So the other thing I forgot to mention that we in the intro, though, as far as like the timing of things, I don't know if you remember this, but Bioshock was known, but I don't think it came out in August is my memory, because August, so it came out before the big games hit, and this is Modern Warfare came out this year, Halo 3, etc. So dominated by these other shooters, but this was a bit of a sleeper hit in that I think the uber gamers and nerds like us knew about it, but it was kind of a sleeper hit. And people, you know, more people, because of it's probably broadening its audience, more people played it, more gamers played it than say System Shock. And so I think it definitely surprised the industry to some degree too, because it was so different, and such.
Yeah. And I'll say there was a whole generation of games, critics and journalists who got their start around the time of Bioshock. This was the time of the blogosphere, the brainy sphere, as we called it, in my quarters of it, which was just, you know, discussing deeper stuff that was in video games. And this was one that just had a lot more going on from its themes and the things it was concerned with, on top of being a competent, if not amazing shooter for the time. You know, more than competent. The competence a little underselling it. I think it was a much better shooter than
it was a good shooter.
That we would have had expectations of as people who'd played other irrational games.
Well, and
games of its lineage,
and thematically, and to contrast it, I think the other reason that I bring up its sort of release timing and its sleeper quality, I think, you know, 2K thought they had something, but I don't think they realized exactly what they had. You know, it was kind of that, again, a breakout. And that August slot, just to give a super inside baseball tidbit, like that August slot in my circles ended up becoming marketing would call that slot the Bioshock slot. Because August is getting out in front of the fall deluge of big games where you think you might have something that actually might be clever and stick and really do well, but you don't want it to come out with Call of Duty or Halo or anything like that. So you put it out in August instead of September, October, November, where you get it out early. You get some notoriety. So Arkham Asylum, I believe, was in the Bioshock slot as well. There's some other notable ones that use that slot strategically, and so it actually, and Bioshock is one of the first ones where, and again, snarkily, people would call it the Bioshock slot.
I mean,
Bioshock was one of the ones that sort of originated it.
The window that you're talking about, that the big games are aiming for, is basically as late as you can, but before Thanksgiving is really is the window. I mean, Skyrim, of course, was 11/11. I believe Fallout 3 was in November as well. Don't quote me on that because I hadn't been sleeping a lot at that point, and I don't really remember. But also this year, Uncharted was November 19th or something, and right. So that's when the big games that feel like they're going to do okay, and they're willing to go toe to toe. There might be an elephant in the room that people want to get out of the way of. But generally speaking, it is, that's the window where the big hitters are gonna come out. And I think it's interesting, you say the Bioshock date. I never thought of it that way. But it's another one where people, I think, sort of jockey for it, and they kind of get out of the way when they realize they're not the one. It's like they'll push, they'll push, they might push to February or something like that. If they're like, what, we're not going to have the Bioshock effect or whatever. Yeah. I was looking up Assassin's Creed came out in November as well, November 13th. I was just curious, like what games thought they were the thing that year, that they knew they were going to do okay. And then this one came out in the Bioshock slot, as you say. Yeah. And it's like, oh yeah, good strategy, get out ahead. People are hungry, they know they're going to get their big game coming in a couple of months, 3 months, but they're it's the end of the summer. They're going back to school. Right. They're looking for something to do other than homework.
You take a chance on something that quirky, case in point. And I think, early mid-September falls into this as well. You just want to stay out of October, essentially. Deathloop is coming out right now. Right. So, that's directly the direct lineage, really, to this. And I mean, if you watch, I think both of us maybe watched that trailer recently, the release trailer recently. I did today. I mean, that looks like a Bioshock game to me. I mean, it's like the powers and the shooting and the powers and the shooting. And, it's like you're throwing, they have the cool time loop thing, which is a whole new thing. But, I don't know I don't think it'll be called an immersive sim. Maybe it will be, but it doesn't seem like it. But it's in the space. So.
Yeah, now I'm basically going around and like, what other games came out? In the Bioshock, Arcane's a good one.
Arkham. Arkham is a perfect example of this, right? Because superhero games were not a thing. They were not good, and they had a bad reputation.
Mostly quite bad.
And people were like, the Arkham Asylum Batman game, what is this? Rocksteady hadn't had a huge hit before. But I think IDOS knew what they had, and they're like, oh, this could be something. Let's get that Bioshock slot. Don't put it up against Call of Duty, but and then again, sleeper hit. So anyway, a little inside baseball maybe, but so back to the opening sequence. So now we're in, we take the bathysphere
away from the marketing, back to the game.
Which, just take even the concept of taking a bathysphere rather than anything else is like, when have you seen that in a game? So it's just like, and then the other thing I think we need to because as soon as you walk into the tower above water, the lobby's there and there's a big poster and I think a statue of him, of Andrew Ryan and stuff. And so immediately you see the Art Deco and sort of the aesthetic of things starting to form too, like that Jules Verne-esque kind of feel to things and water. Like I just want to mention just that, in sci-fi, you have space and you have, there's certain themes that come back to both influence gameplay as well as the sort of in a Aliens game or a System Shock game that kind of amplifies fear or whatever, right? And so I think one of the clever things about this game is that they didn't have space, they didn't have any other sort of element to sort of amplify that fear, but most humans are afraid of water, like being under the water this deep, and
or drowning
basically, right? And what could happen. And so I feel pressure. Your pressure, you're walking through sheets of water multiple times and it's in your face, and in this early section, and then of course, so we'll talk about a couple other moments, but just they're setting the scene. And I think I remember being like completely enveloped in it, and just like, wow, this is not something I've seen before.
They also, in this early bit, to a degree that they'll kind of let go of, and we'll talk about that as it goes, but they lean into the horror aspect of it at this point. There's a lot of, we're going to introduce you to a cast of characters, like when you're in the bathysphere and Atlas is talking to you through the radio, which you can kind of, it kind of draws your eye. You look over at the radio before you pull it off and it becomes part of your equipment. You see a slicer, take a guy apart out there.
Yeah.
Right.
Pretty graphic. Yeah.
Yeah. Pretty graphic. And then, you'll go out, you'll get your first plasmid and you'll see the Big Daddy. And, it's literally in these huge Dutch angles, of like, this one, see the angel, it's an angel. I know it'll be an angel soon. And you're like, what are they talking? What is that? Oh my God. I mean, it's another fear there, right? It's this gigantic needle that she's carrying in her hand. And you're like, oh my God. Plus the deep sea diving outfit, of an old time deep sea diving outfit that the Big Daddy is made out of and wearing with all the lights all over it. I mean, they really lean into all these horror elements here, to a degree that this is going to become a power fantasy wish fulfillment game. This early going is very much like, I'm scared. I feel very weak. And I'm crouching everywhere because I was literally, having played the game before, I was literally still crouching everywhere in this introductory section. Just trying to, I don't want that thing with the hooks for hands to come after me. That seems bad.
Yeah.
So
it's survival. It's got survival horror aspects of it, just like System Shock 2 did, but more so, right? I mean, it feels, other than being a shooter, it's very survival horror-y. And I think to their credit, which I think the podcast knows, it's also one of the never leave first person games, even in the cinematic sections. Sometimes your camera is completely taken over, but there's a lot of times, like in the bathysphere, where you can't move around, but you can look around with your camera, and some sequences like that. So, or sequences like when they introduce fully introduce the second time you see the little sister and the Big Daddy through that that grating. So you can obviously move around, right, and watch everything happening, and a cool catwalk sequence above before you get there. And but it's just that helps the immersion, and some of the mystery, because again, you still don't really know why you're here or who you are. I don't remember. Yeah, it's gonna be interesting because I don't remember the details of the story and sort of. So I'm it'll be interesting to relive that stuff.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to talk about. I mean, one of the things that I think the game does quite well is it is very, there's a lot of little stories in it. And I think that's really important to its success, as far as being able to pull you through the game and have lots of little tales of, what happened in Rapture in the, months before it all fell apart on New Year's Eve or whatever it was. I think it's New Year's Eve. And we've sort of gotten that sense already. I mean, we end up going to this bar. We hear an audio diary from Diane McClintock, I think is her name. We're going to hear her whole story, if you find it, right? I mean, that's the other thing, is that it kind of does that thing of enticing you, of like, if you're the sort of person who's interested in narrative, who likes that, it's like, oh, here's the thing to go find. And we're going to reward you for really searching out the spaces. Sure, you'll find candy bars and potato chips and whiskey and cigarettes and, a million other things, but you're also going to find more of these diaries, and they're going to tell you, they're going to grow the story space for you, right? You're going to have lots of little tales. You're going to have characters that come back. You're going to know more about some of the main characters. There's whole things about smuggling Bibles and stuff that comes in, through all these sort of things. And it's something that's still done today. I mean, you're starting Control tonight. I've played a lot of Control in the last couple of days, and they're still doing some of these things. It's sort of doing it more richly, but they're still doing some of these things. And you can see that lineage in storytelling delivery, but also, growing the narrative space in that game, that came out, I don't know, 2-3 years ago now. So, anyway,
they probably aren't the first ones or the only ones, but I do think that well implemented audio logs that are optional but flesh out, especially shooters like this where you don't have a lot of cutscenes or cinematics doing that. Audio logs, I feel like Bioshock gets the credit for the most part, right? For modern audio logs, which is sort of it's maybe to some listeners, it seems like a small kind of obvious thing, but when you think about Half-Life 2 Episode 2 coming out at the same year, being maybe one of the other apex examples of a story-driven first-person shooter. Halo 3 doesn't have anything like that. Modern Warfare definitely doesn't have anything like that. So it's like telling story. And the other thing that probably people wouldn't think of too much either is that these are the sorts of things in shooters that often get cut because they don't seem to be as valuable to most people as they should be. And I think the other thing, that what ended up sort of happening, especially in sort of my circles, is that it's like, oh, wait a second, this actually is a pretty inexpensive way to get good story into the game without having to do cutscenes, because those are even more expensive, So it sort of ended up being a have your cake and eat it too situation, especially for a game like this where it's meant to be so immersive and they're optional. So it's like, with cutscenes, whether you care about story or not, you're going to probably be, watching them or skipping them. But here, like, don't pick it up if you don't want to pick it up. But if you do, well acted, well written, mysterious, like Brett said, breadcrumbs that are unraveling more and more of the story. And I do keep hearing about this from Control, like people keep saying, like, you got to read everything and listen to everything because there's all sorts of, that's where the real story is. And it's both production wise very clever and good, efficient, but also good for the player, I think, a lot of times, because you get more of it and it's optional.
It also,
Death Stranding, I think, was the same way.
Yeah. I was going to say it's also I think it's what really establishes the place as a place, right? Is because they refer in that sort of fictional way. Things happen in places. They refer to locations in the audio diaries where things happened, and you're going to go to them. They mention people that
foreshadowing
run some of these things. So there's a lot of foreshadowing, but there's also just pure, like, it makes the place seem more real because these people lived in it, right? Yeah. And that's all of those things that you mentioned really pay off in that way. Like, because the voice acting is so good, it really works that you feel like that person actually was here, in this undersea city. Yeah. So, that's a really good point that we'll get back to as we come through the story. Which, I don't know, there is a story, but anyway, what I was going to say, what the point you're just making there is, I think, critical, because the other part of the mystery is you've arrived here at a time. This clearly looks like a working city, but you've arrived here at a time where things are not right. And so if you're going to get story about what happened or different times in the past,
you would either need to do a flashback cutscene or a flashback playable sequence. But here you get these very convenient. You get to hear what these people were saying in the past. I guess I'm forgetting now. Does System Shock 2 have? I guess they didn't. Did they have emails?
They had notes, right? And stuff. Yeah, they had terminals and
similar stuff. Yeah. So you could kind of see. Oh gosh, it just makes me want to play.
But because you can pick them up, you can pick them up and you walk around, and they're just playing while you walk around. Like, they're easy to not ignore, if you know what I mean. Like, they're easy to just be like, oh, I'll just pick that up and start that, and then I'll just keep going. I'll just keep playing the game. I've definitely had experiences in games. This is one of the few missteps I thought Horizon had, which was that if you wanted to play an audio log that was in your inventory, and that game had a ton of them, you had to stop. You had to wait.
Oh, yikes. Yeah.
And it's like, whoa, that's so, the value proposition on those things is now like, I know there's probably a ton of stuff in there that's interesting, but because I can't basically listen to the podcast while I play the game, I no longer want to do that part of it. It's like, oh, I didn't hear it. I think there's a way, like, I think when you find it in the world, like, you can key it and it'll go and it'll just play. But if you ever go back, like, there's a pacing problem with them, that they're not spaced properly. Like, they'll finish by they won't have finished by the time you find the next one. So basically they messed up some of these things. So there's a lot of things that Bioshock really got right, I guess, is what I'm trying to emphasize, that are easy to get wrong. Like, even with a good example, you can still make a mistake of like, oh, I didn't understand that's what the system was doing, right? And this just does that terrifically.
Would you kindly talk about Atlas a little bit now, maybe?
I will just talk about Atlas to the degree that he is sort of leading you. It's good, I think, to have a character. I know what you did there. It's also the first 3 words he says. When you're
which I had forgotten.
Bathysphere. Yeah,
I'd forgotten, and I was actually excited to replay the game and listen for it, because I had only played it once before, so I didn't. Yeah, but I thought it was just brilliant that it's the first.
Yeah, he says, "Would you kindly take the radio down?" And and bring it with you or something like that.
Yeah, we'll get there. But as far as
we want to wait and let that be part of the reveal later, because that's such a huge big deal. But yeah, I mean, he's basically, he's giving you the main quest at this point in the game. He's like, hey, you're gonna need plasmids. Like, he's the tutorial voice as well, but he's definitely a fully fleshed character that's part of the world, and you get a sort of sense of the plight. He's sort of in a similar position to you. He somehow has information about where things are and what's going on. He's got a family that he wants your help with. That's kind of the next section in Neptune's bounty, which is a whole thing. But he's a very well drawn character at this point. He's also working class, you would guess, right? Because he's got the accent, right? I mean, this
memorable voice,
yeah. So it's just really, really well done. How this stuff is all set up, and it's, I look back on it and I think, how was I fooled? And now playing it again, I'm like, oh yeah, of course you were fooled. Like, this is just really well done. It's just really well produced, polished, to do this stuff to you.
I can't imagine anyone. I mean, I don't know how you'd ever find a statistic. Maybe Irrational has a statistic of something that they did at some point with some sort of user research, but how many people would have figured it out? I mean, it's just so well done and well hidden and just eased into the flow of things.
Yeah. For sure. I'd say we should put a pin in it there, and get to a couple emails just to do a couple. I'm pleased to revisit Rapture. I mean, I'm probably less interested in revisiting some aspects of this game. But I will say, I was, this intro it's just fantastic. It's really a great object lesson of like, here's how to start your game. Like, here's how to set up tension and also, give the sense of more going on. This is where you set up the smoke and mirrors. Is like, hey, here at the beginning where everything's really tightly controlled, we're going to give you the idea that the experience is something that it maybe isn't always, right? And we're going to cheat, all kinds of ways, going down the line. You're going to buy into it more because we've really set up the smoke machine really well here at the beginning. So place all the mirrors just so.
And you want to keep playing for sure.
Yep. Oh yeah. If you're curious, like, it was tough to pull myself away from it. So yeah. Okay. Let's turn now to email, to of course, devgameclub@gmail.com. I gave you a couple. I think we'll just do one each. I think that so we can get you to your new job on time.
You're exciting. You're excited,
Mr. Director. I am so excited for you to play. I'm probably not going to stay up to watch.
No.
I'll probably be playing. I'm thinking, sleep. Do we really need it?
Yeah. That's the age-old question. But it'll be there for you. It'll be there for you tomorrow and the next day. So relish it.
Sure. Anyway, let's turn to email. You have one from Pockets.
Yes, Pockets. Johnny Pockets. Old World game release. Subject is Old World game released by Soren Johnson from Johnny Graton. Good day, gentlemen. A quick note to let you know that Old World, previously 10 Crowns by Soren Johnson and Mohawk Games, has been released. He mentioned it in your interview, and you said you would give it a shout out once it was released. Here is my reminder. I'm excited to play this and see how Soren applied his lesson to Civ 3. Lessons from Civ 3. Links included, show notes, best Pockets. Yes, I actually have been. We totally forgot to do a shout out. Apologize for that. But I actually have been following this a little bit, specifically. Did we talk to Soren must have been after the interview where he was explaining a little bit of or was it in the interview where he was explaining sort of?
We talked to him post-interview about the changes he was making to mechanics because he clearly wanted to talk to somebody about it. So afterwards he's like, so I thought about it, about how to reapproach the 4X and do something different with it. And to avoid, problems X, Y, and Z that I see, Civ 3 having, for example. So
yeah, he has a specific way that he's dealing with essentially what you can do in a turn in a balancing way that is sort of a little bit taken from tactical, turn-based tactical games or even board games. And it sounded fascinating, like a fascinating solution to me. And so yeah, I definitely want to check it out. And I suggest if people are looking for and in some of the short reviews that I've read on it sound pretty interesting too. So yeah, it is out. Congrats, Soren. It's been out for a little while, so we're behind on this, but yeah, check it out.
Yeah, and I'm pretty sure that he actually sent us a code. It was 10 crowns back in the day, and they were gonna rename it. That was also a timing thing where he was like, he was like hadn't announced yet and didn't want to announce on the podcast because he had stuff coming up. But anyway, so
yeah, they had they made it, and it was actually right around COVID was starting to hit too, I think. Wasn't that around then?
I feel like it was the year before that, but
was it?
I don't know. No. Dude, what do I know?
Nope, you could be right. Moving on.
I will read an email here from Drew. I'm going to look down and see. Yeah, Drew just says Drew. The subject is One Little, Two Little, Dead Little Aliens. From Drew. Hi, Tim and Brett. First things first, Brett, the last time I emailed, I spelt your name incorrectly. My apologies. Please find and close the T I omitted the last time. Yeah, thank you. I appreciate it. I'll try to patch it into the old one. I really enjoyed your Ratchet & Clank series. It's one of my favorite game series of all time. I don't want oversaturation, but it's really disappointing that there was only one entry in the series on PS4. Hopefully Rift Apart will only be the first on PS5. I also have all the platinum trophies, which did also include the use of an elastic band on a controller. Totally worth it. Oh?
No, I just was like another platinum Ratchet and Clank nerd
guy
out there. Yeah, there's another one.
We're a merry little band. For me, what's so great about the series and what a lot of other games get wrong, or at least not quite right, is that it's just fun. It's a distinction I suspect not everybody would make, but while many games can be enjoyable and entertaining, RNC games are fun and deserve the capital letters. Even the dad jokes are endearingly groan-worthy rather than grating. Part of that is certainly the weapon design, because no one makes game weapons like Insomniac. They even managed to make a weapon a character. That's a rare skill indeed. Mr. Zircon is one of my favorite characters ever, though he lives only to kill. They also seem to tap into some sort of primeval destruction and collection urge, something, though they're much simpler as games, the Traveler's Tales Lego games also do. Smashing up boxes and collecting the bolts studs that come out shouldn't be as satisfying as it is. And while in the early stages of games in both series, you need to collect everything because your resources funds are so low, it's somehow vastly more pleasing to do so in the latter stages, powered up and with multipliers far beyond the need for any more bolts, and watch thousands of shiny little things fly across the screen to your character. Do I need them? No. Are they an Assassin's Creed or GTA style collectible to tick off a list? No. Do they have any purpose? Not really, no. Do I want them? Yes. My God, yes, I want them. He's so right about this. I love the personality coming through in this email, Drew. The pinnacle is undoubtedly using a fully powered up Rhino, laying waste to all and sundry, grinning like a maniac while Tchaikovsky's 1812 overture plays and destruction rains down. See, I didn't remember exactly what it was, but I knew it was classical music that was playing there. The grinning maniac thing may only be me, but the rest I think is pretty universal. Like I said, fun. Though music choice is perhaps not always great. The 1812 is perfect. Mussorgsky's Night on Bald Mountain, which accompanies the gun in a later entry, is dramatic but too serious, but I'm really nitpicking here. Sadly, I didn't get to play along with the series. Last time I wrote, I don't expect you to remember, don't worry. Oh, I remembered. I'm glad I got my tea. I mentioned I just hadn't had the desire to play games in a year or more, and I was enjoying them vicariously through DGC instead. This is actually sorted. I don't care much for JRPGs, much preferring Western titles, but your enthusiasm for Final Fantasy, plus a series of videos on the lore from a YouTube channel called Synonymous, finally unblocked something and prompted me to return to Fallout 3. So I fired up Steam, installed a bunch of mods, and stepped once more into the wasteland, and, well, this is my life now. Thank you, damn you. In one of the RNC episodes, Brett mentioned Mr. Drippy, Tidy, from Ni no Kuni. Fantastic character and possibly the most Welsh thing any video game has ever seen, and what made me suppress my usual preference for the original language soundtrack and select to play with the English dub instead. Most of this comes from film, where I passionately dislike dubs, even in animations where it might be argued they're less problematic or jarring, though a fair chunk of it comes from bad experience, like having played a Sega game. Yikes. The barbs. Any Sega game, it doesn't matter which. Though, of course, if you need a concrete example, pretty much any Ghost Squad or House of the Dead game will do. I want to aside here about Sega games. Playing Yakuza, which I believe are Sega, here with the Japanese and subtitles is the way to play those games. It is so great. That's the way to play. I don't know if the translations are bad. I honestly have no idea. But it's just something. It's like playing a Japanese gangster movie, except one that's 60 hours long, which is a tremendously long-winded way of bringing me to my question. Do either of you have an opinion or preference when it comes to selecting the language of a game soundtrack when offered the option? Does it make a difference to you? And to pop back to Ni no Kuni for a moment, a game I really enjoyed, particularly thanks to Mr. Drippy and the Studio Ghibli visuals, but still a game I wanted to symbolically throw out of my window because after 70 hours of play, it was still holding my damn hand. From your experiences, how much thought or resource goes into balancing that sort of thing, i.e. tutorialization and player training? How do you gauge when to let go of the player's hand? If you can answer this in any sort of succinct way. Is it something that is added once everything else is done, or is it a running thing throughout development? Right, I'll stop writing now and give your eyes a break. Keep up the good work, and good luck with the new studio. I'm really looking forward to Bioshock, and I think I may actually tear myself away from Fallout to play along this time. A man chooses, after all. Drew. Killing stuff is so much fun. Doo-dah, doo-dah. Zircon kills stuff all day long, all the doo-dah day. Had some more Mr. Zircon love there at the end. So, a couple of questions there.
Wow, Drew is just on fire. That was
I tell you, quite a mail. Yeah. So soundtrack, does that make a difference to you? I mean,
soundtrack is in music
varies.
soundtrack, or was he?
I think he more
I think
meant
he
the
was
language.
talking about
language.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I just used no. Unfortunately, I think, and actually, over the years of doing the podcast now, I've regretted this, but I tend to just use the default English translation and localization. But to your point of the and as you know, not being a JRPG player, as everyone knows probably by now, and the
You mean a closet JRPG player is what you mean at this point.
Right, exactly. Other than, I guess, Metal Gear as a series, I don't play a lot of Japanese games specifically that would focus heavily on VO. So I haven't had a lot of opportunity, but I do regret now not. I think the next one I play, which ironically I just finished one and I didn't do this, but I think it's because the actors
were in English,
US, so it didn't make as much sense. But if I would ever go back and play a Metal Gear game, I think I would try turning on Japanese, because I want to see what that's like. Feels more genuine. But
I mean,
not
I like
playing
now. the Yakuza games are ones that I like to play that way. I think if I played from any region of the world where there was a strong regional flavor in the content, like so I'm using Control as an example, and Alan Wake, they're the other game that I've played by Remedy recently. I'll only ever play those in English because it's a setting in the US in both cases, like Pacific Northwest or New York, I guess. Not that, I mean, the Control setting is kind of its own thing. It's self-contained. Could be in any dimension, I suppose. If they were presenting a uniquely sort of Swedish, story, then I would feel differently. Like I'd want to maybe have the Swedish in that, because it's a big part. If you watch Swedish cinema or something like that, you want to hear that and the rhythms of that, and sure, you also have to read at the same time. So it does make a difference to me, and I do often, if I have the opportunity, particularly like I said with Yakuza, if I can play that in the original, I love it. I love it that way. Tutorialization question. I feel like that's one where one of the things that we've done for usability over the last 15 20 years or whatever is that we often have the prompts on screen all the time of like, well, you just you press square to do this, and whenever you walk up to a thing, the square is there, right? If you're using a PlayStation controller, and so whatever A, B, X, or Y on the other systems, and it's just there, it's in the world. And I feel like in Ni no Kuni they were like, yeah, but what if everything that we do in the tutorial we did all the time, and that was just the way we presented the game, just always had the whatever. So I think some thought probably went into it, and they maybe just came down with the wrong. I have to imagine in test and in development and in-house, they were like, oh my God, like this is too much, but they were too close to it to know. And, maybe they, the people who were telling them, about the usability, no, this will be better. Like I could see it going a lot of different ways. New players will really appreciate this. And it's like, sure, for 20 hours, maybe, but not for 60, 70, like Drew points out. I don't know. You think about this more than I do.
I mean, the problem with the answer for me is it really depends on the game. I guess a general rule that I think we try to use at this point. Well, two important ones, which I think we've talked about before. One is teaching the player without them knowing you're teaching them. That's really the goal, if you can. And I haven't made a JRPG or really an RPG before, like a real one, so it may not apply exactly there because you have so many systems and so much UI and so many things, statistical things going on, that you can't really smoothly do that without a lot of overt hand-holding. So blend it in. And I think, again, we talk about time and time again that Nintendo is constantly tutorializing to you, but you don't know it, and you don't
Right.
and you don't mind. You're fine. To Drew's point, like they're tutorializing you the whole time, but you don't even care. Like that's what you want.
That's the magic.
That's the magic. But if you do have to be overt about it, I mean, the simple answer is once you get all of your core mechanics and systems out there, then try to have a dynamics, then stop basically, and then try to have a dynamic system kick in to when which is more done today than it used to be in the old days. But Cooney certainly could have done this, but once they have taught you everything, once essentially, then you have a dynamic system that only kicks in if there's trouble. Somebody dies a lot in a certain section or is running around in circles for too long, so you use your heat maps to do that or whatever. So, otherwise,
or even just this person has put this game down for 2 weeks, or whatever.
Yeah, that's another good one.
That's the thing that I wish more games did. I mean, there's so many times, like recently, I have not played, other than stuff we've played for the podcast, I hadn't played a game in almost 3 months. Since we started and started the new gig. And I sat down and I was going to, after playing Bioshock, I was going to play some more Dragon Quest Builders, which is the game I was playing. And I got into it. First of all the text is too small, and I'd been playing it downstairs on a TV that was a lot closer to my face, so I could read it, and I could wear glasses and read it. Now my TV's across the room, the TV's bigger, but the text is just ridiculous, and the glasses don't help at the distance. So I'm just like, okay, I can't read any of the prompts to tell me what to do, and I can't remember. It's been 3 months. I have no idea what any of the buttons do. And so I'm like fiddling around and like, and I picked up a guy at one point. I'm like, I didn't mean to pick him up. How do I put him down? Like, I don't know what to do. That's how I came to Control. And so I really have to be thankful that they didn't implement that, because I may not have welcomed the oldest house into my life. So
yeah. Well, speaking of which,
speaking of which, it's time for you to go welcome the oldest house into your life.
I keep hearing about the oldest house, and I'm like, that's a great name. What is it?
You can of course send us reviews via the Apple infrastructure, or whatever podcast listener you use. We'd love to hear all of those. We read them all. Often we read them here on the cast. And of course, the emails at devgameclub@gmail.com. You can find us on the web at devgameclub.com or on Twitter at devgameclub, where you can also find my co-host at
Tim Longo Jr. with the JR at the end,
where he also streams on Twitch with the Tim Longo Jr. with the JR at the end. And you are, of course, will have started Control. Have I said that enough tonight?
Watch the archive, I guess. Yeah.
I'm so thrilled. Yeah, watch the VODs and see Tim embarking on his own adventure into the oldest house. So I'm really looking forward to.
Now I'm scared.
I might watch the VODs. I mean, geez. Our intro and outro music was written and performed by Kirk Hamilton, commissioned by friend of the cast Aaron Evers, and our logo, of course, is by Mark Garcia. Have fun shooting fire from your fingertips this week, and good night.
Good night.
I know I probably should have said electricity because the first one you get is electricity, but fire from your fingertips just
yeah, it's a
has
little,
that pizzazz. It's got a little snap.
yeah.
Got a little spark, as it were.